welcome to my brand new YouTube channel. I've been wanting to talk about my college football game previews for a little while now, and I thought this would be a better avenue for that than a huge thread on Twitter. I also figured this would be a good first video where I can introduce the preview posts, talk a little bit about my methodology, and just generally go over everything that my models take into consideration. First off, from a high level, right now my models take all their data from collegefootballdata.com, so huge shout out to them for having an excellent API, great documentation, and just all the resources that they provide for a lot of people out there. I'll throw a link in the description if you want to check out their site if you're looking into building your own model or even just getting some data about your favorite team. Okay, time to get into the models. There are a lot of people out there who use power ratings to come up with predictions for games. This is definitely a viable methodology for college football, and there are lots of advantages to it, mostly around just how much it simplifies matching teams against one another. My models are much more specific than that, though. We're entirely matchup based, so Team A might be projected to beat Team B, who might be projected to beat Team C, who could turn around and be projected to beat Team A, just purely based on the various strengths and weaknesses of the teams and how the models weigh each statistic. So I'm going to bring up a game preview, and you'll notice that there are three different predictions. There's one prediction for spread, one prediction for total, and a third prediction for win percentage. While spread and win percentage are theoretically correlated, I actually have two different models for each. For one, it offers another independent data point to consider than a win percentage that's just a calculation based on the spread. We already have that information, so presenting it in a different way doesn't really help us much. It also gives us a little insight into a more pure projection of the game as a whole. So first up is our power index. The power index is how we attempt to get a realistic and understandable measure of how good a team is at a given facet of the game. It's an opponent-adjusted metric that helps us determine how much better or worse a team is than the average FBS team for that stat. So in simple terms, a team who has a power index of 1.5 for an offensive statistic is 50% better than the average team is in that metric. Conversely, a team who has a power index of 0.66 for a defensive statistic is 50% better than the average team, a baseline of 1 divided by 1.5. With those power indexes in mind, we can begin looking at some of the head-to-head matchups for a given game. So here's a game preview matchup card from Week 11. It's North Carolina at Wake Forest. This was a game that the model predicted North Carolina to win despite Wake Forest being a favorite of just over a field goal. It's also an interesting matchup because there's a good mix of elite, decent, and terrible power indexes. So we'll start by looking at North Carolina's offensive statistics. Their passing power index is 1.79, or 79% better than the average FBS team. In the middle section, for reference, you can see what their raw yards per attempt numbers are on the season without any opponent adjustment. Next to the power index value, you can see where that unit ranks in all FBS teams. So North Carolina's passing attack was ranked 4th at that time. We can go through the same exercise for rushing and total offense to get a sense of how good their offense is in general. So as I pointed out earlier, our model is a bit different from some models that use total team ratings to determine spreads. So the next unit we'll look at is Wake Forest's defense. Their passing defense power index is 1.01, or 1% worse than the average FBS team. Rushing defense is 0.95, or just over 5% better than average, and total defense is right at 1, or perfectly average. Now we can get into the middle section of the game previews, where we look at how the matchups favor each team. To get a simplified view of the matchup, you can take the offense's power index and multiply it by the defense's power index. So in North Carolina's passing versus Wake's passing defense, we have 1.79 times 1.01. That comes out to 1.81. So you can see that UNC's passing offense is projected to win that matchup, and you can see where it ends up on the scale. The scale ends just over 2. Matchups that lopsided are rare, and honestly, anything beyond that is just such a blowout it doesn't even matter. So the same concept can be applied for all the power index listed in the middle of the card. For each team, power indexes for important offensive and defensive statistics are matched up: passing, rushing, composite, or total yards per play, explosiveness, and success rate. Since Havoc is a defensive-only statistic, the matchups for each team is compared directly to the other to see who is projected to be more disruptive for the other's offense. Finally, recruiting is normalized across a similar 0 to 2 scale and mapped in a similar matchup style. There are a few non-power index statistics that are shown in the preview that are worth pointing out. For offenses, there are 2 deviation stats that help give some insight into a team's consistency from game to game. These stats are not opponent adjusted. So North Carolina has a standard deviation of 0.12 yards per attempt across all their games, the best mark in the country. It's worth pointing out that their yards per attempt for this game was 9.1, or about 0.5 yards per attempt away from their season average, so they remain very consistent in this game as well. The other non-power index statistic located here is points per opportunity. From collegefootballdata.com, an opportunity is defined as a drive in which the offense advanced the ball to outpass the opponent's 40-yard line. So points per opportunity is a measure of how many points each team gets and allows in those situations. This stat is also not opponent adjusted. Finally, at the very bottom of the stats, we have a team's adjusted PI. This is our overall team power rating. We do not use it in any predictive sense, except that it is composed of lots of stats that we do use for predictions. It's just a quick and dirty view into how a team is as a whole when compared with other teams. It's the rating we use for our ratings and rankings each week. The last little tidbit of information that we have about a given matchup is the closest prior matchups. These are nowhere near perfect, especially early in the season, but they can be a helpful look at a team's past performances. For both the offense and the defense, each set shows opponents from earlier in the season with the closest offensive or defensive power index to the opponent. So in this case, the most similar defense that North Carolina's offense faced was Virginia Tech, in which they scored 41 points. The most similar offense that their defense played was Appalachian State, in which they gave up 61. For Wake Forest, it was Boston College and Florida State, respectively. Well, that's all I've got for this video. I hope it was informative and helped give you a closer look into my game preview posts. I'm planning on doing a few preview videos on some upcoming games before the game is played, especially for some of the bigger conference championship games and playoff matchups. If you're up for seeing more of these, please go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel, and please give me a follow on Twitter at Room44B. I'll see you for the next video.